Tonight, we begin somewhere that looks loud, even when it's completely silent. A place made for noise, for crowds, for spectacle. And yet, right now, there is no one here. Stone arches rest under the moonlight. Cool air drifts through empty passageways. A building that once held 50,000 people, now holding absolutely no one. So take a moment to settle in. Let your shoulders loosen, just a little. Unclench your jaw. Let the day begin to slide off you, without effort. There's nothing you need to focus on, nothing you need to remember. Just the sound of a quiet place, finally allowed to be quiet. If this calm journey helps you relax tonight, you're welcome to like the video or subscribe so you can return whenever the night feels long. And if you feel comfortable, you can leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read them slowly, in the quiet hours, because Rome, as it turns out, sounds very different after everyone goes home. The Colosseum, after the crowd left, was not empty. It was unoccupied. And to the Romans, that distinction mattered. Empty suggests nothing happened. Unoccupied suggests everything happened, and the building simply hasn't finished remembering it yet. During the day, the Colosseum was noise, cheering, chanting, arguments rolling through the stone like weather, vendors calling out prices, trumpets announcing moments that demanded attention, drums keeping time with the empire's heartbeat. Rome liked volume. Loud meant alive. Loud meant control. But at night, Rome went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. The last spectators drifted out slowly, sandals scraping against stone, murmured complaints forming about a fight that ended too soon or mercy that came too late. Guards closed the gates with practiced boredom. Vendors packed up unsold bread. Coins were counted and found wanting. And then the Colosseum was left alone with itself. That was when the building became honest. The sand in the arena was raked smooth before every event, but it was never truly clean by nightfall. Workers replaced the top layer when they could. Rome preferred not to dwell, but places designed for repetition have long memories. Beneath the sand lay the hypogeum, the hidden underworld of the Colosseum, a maze of corridors, lifts, cages, ropes and pulleys and trapdoors. By day, it was motion and shouting and signals. By night, it became something else entirely. Quiet machinery is unsettling machinery. Wood cooled and settled, iron sighed softly. Ropes rested after strain. The systems that once raised men and animals into sunlight now sat still, as if thinking things over. Above it all, the seating rose in careful order. Rome loved order. Rome loved hierarchy. And Rome especially loved when hierarchy looked natural. Closest to the arena were the best seats. Cool marble, names carved into stone. The emperor's box sat just high enough to dominate the space without pretending to mingle. Nearby, the senators, close enough to feel important, far enough to remember they were not that important. Above them, the ordinary citizens, then women, then the poor, foreigners, the enslaved, stacked upward like an afterthought. At night, no one sat there, but the message remained. The Colosseum never forgot who belonged where. Officials sometimes walked the seating tiers after dark, not for exercise, not for nostalgia. This was a memory walk, a political one. This is where loyalty sits. This is where applause begins. This is where silence starts to feel dangerous. Rome watched crowds the way doctors watched symptoms. A loud crowd was healthy. A quiet one meant something was wrong. And the Colosseum was the perfect instrument. 50,000 reactions, all at once. At night, the faces were gone, but the implications stayed. Somewhere in the shadows, guards leaned on their spears. Torches flickered gently. Shadows stretched across arches that had seen more fear than comfort, no matter how much cheering tried to cover it. The Colosseum absorbed fear well. Not theatrical fear, real fear. Fear of rebellion, fear of boredom, fear that Rome's grip on the world was not as secure as it pretended. By scheduling violence, Rome told itself it understood it, that it could contain it, that chaos behaved if you gave it rules and uniforms and a trumpet cue. That belief was optimistic. Most nights passed quietly. That was the point. Routine soothed the empire. Routine promised that tomorrow would look like today, and today had not ended the world. Yet. But not everyone slept easily on Colosseum nights. Nearby, gladiators lay awake on thin bedding, listening to the city settle. They were not heroes in the modern sense. They were assets, investments, carefully managed risks. Some were enslaved, some were prisoners, some volunteered, which meant debt, disgrace, or desperation dressed up as bravery. They trained hard, they were fed well, they were valuable, and they were replaceable. The night before a match was long, longer than the match itself. Men stared at ceilings, counted breaths, tried not to imagine the feel of sand beneath their hands. Above them, the Colosseum waited, silent, patient. Elites slept closer to comfort, but not always to peace. Some senators attended the games out of obligation, not enjoyment. Pliny the Younger wrote about the crowds with politeness, but never joy. He described movement, noise, reaction, which tells you everything. Rome did not require love, it required participation. Philosophers had an even harder time pretending. Stoics, especially, found the games deeply uncomfortable. Discipline, restraint, virtue, none of it survived contact with the arena. And yet, they attended. Because philosophy was personal, politics was not. Marcus Aurelius watched games he disliked because the empire demanded it. He wrote about self-control while funding spectacles built on excess. Rome was very good at contradiction. It functioned on it. At night, the Colosseum made those contradictions visible. Without the crowd, the arena looked smaller, exposed. The seats towered. The scale felt wrong, like a place built for noise didn't know what to do with silence. It became clear the building was never about individual fighters or animals. It was about size, about reminding everyone how small they were. Rome loved structures that dwarfed people. It helped keep thoughts manageable. The city around the Colosseum settled into sleep. Fires dimmed, footsteps faded. Somewhere, someone laughed too loudly and was told to stop. Somewhere else, someone prayed very quietly, just in case. Inside the Colosseum, guards changed shifts. Torches were replaced. Water stood ready, not for thirst, but for fear of fire. Rome burned often. Stone or not, the Colosseum contained wood, rope, scaffolding, machinery. A fire here would not just be damage, it would be embarrassing. Rome tolerated decay. It did not tolerate embarrassment. And so the night passed slowly, methodically, the way Rome preferred. By morning, vendors would return, gates would open, sand would be smoothed, people would sit where they were told, they would cheer when expected, they would leave believing they had witnessed something meaningful. The Colosseum would stand there calm and polite, because stone is very good at keeping secrets, and because tomorrow, Rome would need reminding again of who was in charge. Hey guys, let's keep moving quietly. Because once the Colosseum settled into silence, it wasn't the gladiators or emperors who owned the night. It was the workers. Rome liked to imagine the Colosseum as a monument, timeless, marble, imperial confidence carved into stone. But monuments don't clean themselves. After the crowd went home, The Colosseum became a workplace, a very tired one. Lanterns appeared first, not dramatically, no grand reveal, just practical light carried by men who knew exactly where not to step. The arena floor looked different by torchlight, smaller, uneven, honest. Sand clung to everything, blood dried dark and sticky. The smell didn't vanish just because the cheering stopped. Rome never talked much about smells. That should tell you something. The cleaners came in teams, some with rakes, some with baskets, some with the unenviable job of collecting what couldn't be smoothed over. Bones missed by earlier sweeps, broken equipment, personal items no one would be coming back for. A helmet strap snapped during a fight might still be laying where it fell. A dropped charm, a tooth. Rome was efficient, but it was not sentimental. These workers were not paid to reflect. They worked quickly because dawn always came faster than expected, and the Colosseum needed to look eternal by morning. Sand was leveled. New layers were brought in when required. If the stains were too deep, the solution was simple: more sand. Rome believed deeply in layers. Below them, in the Hypogeum, the night shift moved more carefully. The underworld of the Colosseum was never fully silent. Even after the animals were gone, those that survived long enough to be led back out, there were cages to secure, mechanisms to inspect, lifts to reset. Wood swelled at night, metal contracted, ropes frayed in ways that were easy to miss if you were careless, and carelessness got people crushed. The Hypogeum required perfect timing during the games. At night, it demanded memory. Workers retraced steps, checked pulleys, replaced wedges, tightened knots with hands that already ached from the day before. These men knew something important. The spectacle depended on what nobody saw. When things went wrong, and they did, it wasn't the crowd that suffered first. It was the workers. A gate that opened too early, a lift that jammed halfway, an animal that decided it was done cooperating. Those moments were handled quickly, not gently, quickly. Rome did not pause the games for safety briefings, and the deaths that happened below the arena were not part of the show, so they were not remembered. No applause, no inscriptions, just an empty position filled by mourning. The Colosseum absorbed loss without comment. Guards patrolled above, moving slower now. Their job at night was less about control and more about prevention. Fires were the great fear. Stone didn't burn, but everything else did. Scaffolding, awnings, machinery. The velarium, the massive fabric canopy that shaded crowds, was brilliant engineering and also a nightmare if something went wrong. Torches were watched closely. Water stood ready. Orders were repeated without enthusiasm. A fire here wouldn't just damage property, it would damage Rome's image, and image mattered. Some guards passed the time by counting arches. Others leaned against walls and tried not to think about how many nights they'd spent inside this building, watching shadows move where crowds once sat. A few told stories quietly. Most didn't. Sound carried strangely here. The Colosseum remembered voices. Somewhere above, rats moved freely. They had learned the schedule long before humans did. Outside the walls, Rome slept unevenly. This was a city that never truly rested. Bakers were already working. Water carriers moved before sunrise. Someone was always awake, always late, always early. The empire ran on routine and exhaustion. But the Colosseum felt separate at night, cut off, like a city within a city that had outlived its own purpose and was waiting for instructions. In nearby quarters, gladiators heard the sounds of cleanup through stone and distance, rakes scraping, gates closing, the low murmur of men doing necessary, thankless work. Some found comfort in it. If the Colosseum was still being prepared, then the world was still following its rules. Others found it unbearable. Every sound was a reminder that the arena would wake again. Superstition thrived in those hours. Men touched charms, whispered names, avoided certain words. Some prayed to gods they didn't fully believe in because belief was optional, but habit was not. Others stared at walls and tried to picture anything except the shape of the arena from below. A few slept, not deeply, not well, but enough to survive the morning. Elites rarely thought about the night workers until something went wrong. A delay, a smell, a visible stain that offended sensibilities. Then questions were asked, voices were raised, blame was assigned downward. Rome liked efficiency. It loved invisibility even more. The Colosseum functioned because thousands of people did things no one wanted to acknowledge: cleaning, repairing, resetting, preparing the stage for controlled chaos. At night, the building felt heavier. Without the noise, the weight of stone pressed inward. Arches loomed, corridors narrowed. The scale that impressed crowds became oppressive. Some workers swore the Colosseum watched them. Not literally, of course. Rome wasn't mystical like that. But the sense lingered, that this place had seen too much to be neutral, that it expected things to continue exactly as they always had. And they did. By the time the sky began to lighten, the night crews were already fading away. Lanterns dimmed, tools were stored. The arena looked calm and prepared again, almost innocent, which was the most unsettling transformation of all. Because by morning, people would arrive believing the Colosseum existed for them, that it was entertainment, that it was tradition, that it was proof of Roman greatness. They wouldn't think about the men who stayed after everyone else left. Rome rarely did. And somewhere below the arena, the Hypogeum waited, dark, mechanical, patient, ready to lift whatever Rome needed into the light next. Hey, still here? Good. Let's move a little deeper now, because while the workers finished their tasks and slipped away before dawn, there were others who didn't leave at all. They just waited. If the Colosseum was quiet at night, the gladiators' quarters were quieter. Not peaceful, just restrained. These rooms weren't prisons, exactly. Rome preferred softer language for things like this. They were schools, barracks, training facilities. All very respectable words for places where men were kept under watch and taught how to die properly. The cells were small, but functional. Stone walls, wooden doors reinforced with iron, straw bedding that never quite lost the smell of sweat and old blood. Some rooms held one man. Others held several, depending on rank, value, and how much Rome cared about appearances that week. Veterans usually had it better. Slightly more space, slightly more privacy, slightly more trust that they wouldn't do something inconvenient like run. New fighters learned quickly not to complain. Complaints didn't travel upward. They just lingered in the air and made everything heavier. The night before a match stretched longer than it should have. Sleep came in fragments, a few minutes here, a half-dream there. Enough to blur the edges of fear, but never enough to erase it. Bodies rested because they had to, not because they felt safe. Some men lay staring at the ceiling, counting breaths. Others sat against walls, knees drawn up, hands resting on scars they knew by memory. Scars were proof, not of bravery. Rome didn't care about that, but of survival. The more scars you had, the longer you'd lasted. And lasting was everything. Lantern light crept in from the corridors as guards passed. Their footsteps were steady, practiced. They weren't cruel, necessarily. Cruelty required effort. Indifference was cheaper. Every gladiator knew the sounds by heart. Which steps meant a routine check, which meant food coming, which meant something else entirely. Food, at least, was reliable. The meals were heavy. Barley, beans, simple things, built for endurance, not pleasure. Gladiators were often mocked for it, called barley men by citizens who enjoyed watching them bleed but had opinions about their diet. Of course they did. The irony didn't bother Rome. It rarely noticed irony unless it was engraved in marble. Some fighters ate slowly, deliberately, like ritual. Others barely touched their bowls, stomachs tight with anticipation, A few joked quietly, dark humor, the kind that keeps panic at bay without waking it fully. Someone always told the same kinds of stories. A fight they'd won, a beast that moved strangely, a sponsor who'd promised freedom and maybe meant it. Freedom was the most dangerous word in the room, because sometimes it happened. Rarely, just often enough to keep hope alive. A wooden sword presented, a public gesture, applause turning into approval. Most of the time, it was a lie that lasted longer than the men who believed it. Superstition took over when logic failed. Charms were touched again and again, scraps of cloth tied in careful knots, names of gods murmured under breath, Mars, Hercules, Nemesis, depending on who you were and what you feared most. Some men prayed to foreign gods Rome had absorbed without fully understanding, because desperation makes room for everyone. Others refused to pray at all. They'd seen too many outcomes to trust divine attention. Instructors moved through the quarters quietly, older fighters who no longer entered the arena themselves, men with stiff joints and careful eyes. They corrected posture, reminded fighters to conserve energy, offered advice they knew might not matter. "Watch the left," one would say. "Don't rush the animal. Listen for the horn." Good advice, sensible advice, advice that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Because once the gate opened, control was mostly an illusion. Above them, the Colosseum waited. From inside these rooms, it felt impossibly large. The sounds from the night cleanup had faded, replaced by a deeper stillness, the kind that presses against your ears, the kind that makes your own breathing feel too loud. Some gladiators imagined the arena constantly, others avoided thinking about it at all. Visualization was dangerous. If you pictured it too clearly, your body started reacting early. Muscles tensed, heart rate climbed, energy burned before it was needed. The smart ones saved themselves. There were always men who wrote letters, scratched names into walls, small marks that said, "I was here," because history wasn't interested otherwise. Literacy varied, spelling was flexible, the meaning was always the same: remember me. Guards pretended not to notice. Officially, nothing was supposed to alter the walls. Unofficially, there were too many marks to stop. Erasing them would have required acknowledging how many people passed through these rooms and never came back. Rome preferred smooth surfaces. As dawn approached, the atmosphere shifted. Not suddenly, gradually, like pressure changing before a storm. The air felt different, heavier, more intentional. Somewhere, a horn would eventually sound. Somewhere, gates would open. Somewhere, crowds would begin to arrive, unaware that anything had existed here overnight at all. A few men finally slept then. Exhaustion won. Brief, dreamless rest took them under for precious minutes. Others remained awake, eyes open, listening for the first signal that waiting was almost over. Because the night before the games wasn't about courage or glory or honor. It was about endurance, about surviving the quiet long enough to face the noise. And as the Colosseum prepared to wake, the gladiators waited in the dark beneath it, measured, watched, cataloged, already part of the machinery long before they ever stepped into the light.
Rome woke up slowly, but it never woke up quietly. Long before sunlight reached the stone ribs of the Colosseum, the city had already begun to shift. Not rush. Rome rarely rushed, but adjust itself into motion the way a very large animal does, one limb at a time, entirely confident it owns the ground beneath it. In the streets nearby, vendors arrived first. They always did. Bread sellers, wine carriers, men hauling baskets of olives and figs, already arguing about prices with no customers present yet, just to stay in practice. The games meant crowds. Crowds meant money. Money meant optimism, even if only for a day. Optimism was easier when you weren't the one stepping into the arena. The Colosseum's outer arches caught the early light in a way that made it seem gentler than it actually was, almost welcoming, almost polite, which was impressive considering its entire purpose was to manage chaos at scale. Officials arrived next, not emperors, those came later, but administrators, planners, record keepers. Men who lived their lives surrounded by tablets, lists, schedules, and contingency plans that all assumed humans and animals would behave predictably. They checked gates, inspected seating, reviewed assignments, who sat where, who guarded what, who blew which horn and when. Rome loved hierarchy because hierarchy meant fewer surprises. Inside, the gladiators' quarters were being prepared again. Fresh sand was spread carefully, raked smooth, absorbing whatever the previous day had left behind. Sand was useful that way, forgiving, disposable. It erased evidence without making a fuss about it. The Romans didn't invent denial, but they perfected its aesthetics. Below the floor, the hypogeum came back to life. Cages were checked, lifts tested, ropes pulled and released. Wooden mechanisms creaked in familiar rhythms. The system was complicated, but it worked often enough to inspire dangerous confidence. Animals stirred in the darkness. They didn't understand Rome, or spectacle, or politics. They understood hunger, confinement, and unfamiliar smells. Some paced, some lay still, some pulled against restraints with quiet persistence that unnerved handlers far more than open aggression ever did. The handlers themselves moved carefully. These were not men seeking attention. They were professionals, skilled, underpaid, and extremely aware that mistakes happened below the arena, not above it. No applause waited for them. Above, the seating remained empty, for now. But the structure already told its story. Marble gleamed where senators would sit, less refined stone marked the places for citizens. Higher tiers loomed for women, the poor, and everyone else Rome wanted to keep visible but distant. Order without explanation, power without apology. As the morning wore on, the crowd began to arrive. Families first, groups of friends. Veterans who remembered older games and liked to complain about how things used to be better, because of course they did. Children pulled along reluctantly or eagerly, depending on temperament and how recently they'd been told what might happen inside. The noise built gradually, voices overlapping, laughter, shouting, vendors calling out prices. Somewhere, someone argued about seating. Somewhere else, someone realized they'd brought the wrong person and would have to sit farther away from the action than planned. Rome loved complaints. They were proof that people cared. Inside the gladiators' quarters, the shift was unmistakable. You could feel the crowd before you could hear it, a distant vibration through stone, a subtle change in air pressure. The Colosseum didn't hide its moods, it announced them physically. Fighters were brought out in stages, inspections, equipment checks, final instructions delivered with practiced neutrality. Helmets adjusted, armor strapped and unstrapped and strapped again, because anxiety likes repetition. Some men joked louder now, some went quiet, very quiet. A few looked almost calm. Those were usually the ones who'd already decided how the day would end, one way or another. Trumpets sounded above. Not the dramatic blasts the crowd loved, not yet. These were functional signals. Messages passed through sound because it traveled better than words in a place this large. Rome trusted noise more than conversation. The gates stayed closed. Anticipation stretched. For the crowd, this was part of the pleasure, the delay, the sense that something was coming, that they were participating simply by waiting together. For the fighters below, waiting was the hardest part. Muscles warmed too early. Heartbeats raced ahead of reason. The body wanted action. Stillness felt wrong now, like holding a breath too long. Some men whispered final prayers. Others focused on practical thoughts, footwork, distance, timing, anything concrete enough to anchor the mind. Above them, Rome was settling into its seats. The emperor would eventually arrive surrounded by ritual and expectation, but even before that, the hierarchy was visible. Senators adjusted their robes, officials nodded to one another. Being seen mattered almost as much as seeing. The Colosseum was a mirror as much as a stage. When the first gates finally opened, the noise changed. It sharpened. A collective intake of breath, cheers rolling outward, bouncing off stone, feeding back into themselves. The kind of sound that made individual voices disappear entirely. This was Rome at full volume. The initial spectacles were usually lighter. Animals displayed, demonstrations, warm-up performances that eased the crowd into the day. Rome understood pacing. You didn't begin with the most intense moments, you built toward them. Below, fighters listened. They knew the order, who would go early, who would wait, who would be saved for later when the crowd was louder, less patient, more demanding. The smart fighters preferred the middle, early enough that the crowd still had energy, late enough that officials were paying attention. Last was dangerous. Last meant expectations were high and forgiveness was low. As hours passed, the sun climbed. Heat settled into the stone. The awnings unfurled overhead, casting patterned shade across the seating. Ingenious engineering when it worked, a gamble when it didn't. Wine flowed, food disappeared. The crowd grew looser, louder, more opinionated. Cheers turned into chants. Chants turned into demands. Rome liked to think it controlled the crowd. It didn't. It managed it. Below, the gladiators were brought closer. Closer to the gates. Closer to the light. Close enough now that the roar above wasn't abstract anymore. You could feel it in your chest. You could taste the dust it stirred up. Some men flinched when the gates opened briefly, letting a wash of brightness flood the corridor. Others leaned forward instinctively, eyes narrowing, bodies already adjusting to space they'd trained for endlessly and still couldn't fully prepare for. In those moments, the Colosseum felt less like a building and more like a machine finally reaching full speed. Everything aligned toward one purpose. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the ritual, beneath the certainty Rome liked to project, there was something else, unspoken but present. A shared understanding that all of this order, all of this planning, all of this spectacle existed because chaos was always waiting just beyond the edge. The gates would open again soon. And when they did, Rome would ask a familiar question, one it never stopped asking itself. Can we control this? The answer, as always, would be just enough. For now.
As the echoes of cheering and clashing swords faded into memory, the Colosseum seemed to exhale, a massive structure slowly settling into its own quiet. Without the weight of thousands of feet stamping against stone, the air became dense with the scent of dust, worn timber, and the lingering tang of iron from the arena's past battles. Shadows deepened in the arches and corridors, painting the walls with ghostly shapes that shifted with the soft moonlight. The hypogeum, the underground network of tunnels and cages where gladiators and wild animals once awaited their grim entrances, now lay exposed to silence. Rats and other nocturnal creatures scuttled through the maze of corridors, making the space alive in a different, subtler rhythm. Ancient mechanisms, once hidden under the roar of the crowd, now stood still, their purpose remembered only in the rusting chains and pulleys left behind. It was a place of echoes, of history whispered rather than shouted. From the upper tiers, the seats rose like empty terraces, the marble cool and smooth under the lingering chill of night. The grandeur of Rome's architectural genius was now uncelebrated, observed only by the stars. If one listened closely, it was possible to imagine faint whispers of those who had sat here centuries ago, the senator, the merchant, the matron, all spectators of spectacle. Their excitement, fear, and wonder had long since dissolved into the stones themselves, leaving behind an almost sacred quiet.
Outside, the streets of Rome had emptied, and the distant city sounds were muted. Only the Colosseum remained, a monument that no longer demanded attention, but held it anyway, passively, like an old sentinel watching over a sleeping empire. Its arches framed the moon, each curve a testament to human ambition and endurance. And in that silence, the Colosseum breathed with the memory of blood, sweat, and triumph, a quiet narrative waiting to be discovered by anyone patient enough to observe it without the distraction of spectacle. The following morning, before the sun fully claimed the Roman sky, the Colosseum stood in a half-light, half-shadow, as if caught between centuries. Dust motes floated lazily through the arches, disturbed only by a stray breeze that whispered along the ancient stones. Time itself seemed slower here, unhurried by the bustling streets beyond. Each crack in the marble, each weathered corner told a story of spectators, of emperors, of gladiators whose names were lost to history, but whose footsteps had pressed into the very floor. The arena floor, now exposed to the elements, carried a quiet dignity. The dirt and sand, once churned by frantic combat, had settled into a muted palette of ochres and browns, absorbing the cold light of dawn. It was as though the Colosseum, stripped of its human frenzy, had reclaimed itself, returning to the essence of stone and earth. The hypogeum, hidden tunnels beneath the arena, now seemed almost sacred in its emptiness. No longer a place of forced struggle and spectacle, it breathed a different rhythm, soft, slow, eternal. Shadows played across the walls, hinting at the countless openings, trapdoors, and passageways, each one a potential doorway to the past. Above, the arches echoed the sounds of the city waking far away. Birds had begun to stir, their wings brushing against the broken marble. The Colosseum, in response, seemed to shift imperceptibly, almost as if listening. Every detail, the chipped steps, the carved inscriptions, the fading frescoes, gathered the sunlight in its own way, revealing patterns that human eyes rarely noticed during the rush of daytime crowds. The emptiness allowed for contemplation. For a historian, a wanderer, or a dreamer, it was possible to walk here and feel the weight of history without interruption, to hear the soft pulse of the Roman Empire as it lingered long after its people had departed. And as the morning deepened, a gentle warmth settled across the structure. The Colosseum's stones, worn smooth over centuries, began to hold the light like memory itself. It was a moment of quiet triumph, not of blood or spectacle, but of endurance, the enduring presence of a civilization's ambition, its art, its flaws, all silently preserved. Here, one could imagine a world that had moved on, yet one that had left a permanent echo in stone. As the day advanced, the Colosseum shifted from a place of silent reverence to a quiet observer of the Roman city around it. The streets, once echoing with the feet of citizens rushing to the games, now hummed with ordinary life. Merchants arranged their stalls, children ran through the alleys, and distant carts clattered along the stone roads. Yet the Colosseum remained apart, a monumental witness to centuries of human endeavor and folly, unaffected by the fleeting movements of the living city. Inside, the arena floor took on a different character under the changing light. Shadows lengthened across the sand, tracing the contours of the hypogeum and hinting at the labyrinth beneath. The trapdoors, now silent, recalled moments of dramatic entrances and unexpected deaths, their mechanisms frozen in time. One could imagine the secret lives of gladiators hidden below, some terrified, some exhilarated, waiting for the roar of the crowd that would never come again. The air was cooler near the arches, carrying faint echoes of past chants and cheers, almost imperceptible, like the memory of wind rustling through trees. From the upper tiers, the view stretched across Rome, offering a panorama of terracotta roofs, winding streets, and distant hills. Emperors and citizens alike once shared these vantage points, though their perspectives differed, some looking for glory, others for spectacle. Now the Colosseum watched silently over the city it had once served, its arches framing the horizon with a quiet dignity. The light played across the marble, highlighting the intricate patterns carved by hands long gone. Each crack, each worn edge spoke of centuries of sun, wind, and occasional earthquake, a slow narrative of resilience etched in stone. And as the sun began its descent, shadows deepened once more. The Colosseum, emptied of its audience, seemed to exhale again, settling into the approaching evening. Bats might stir in the shadows of the arches, and the distant hum of the city softened, leaving the amphitheater in a liminal space, between day and night, between history and memory. In this hour, the Colosseum became not merely a building, but a living archive, a keeper of stories, a monument to both the grandeur and the quietness of Rome, long after the crowd had gone home.
As evening fully descended, the Colosseum transformed once again. The fading light softened the contours of the stone, turning the massive structure into a silhouette against the fiery hues of the Roman sky. The arches, empty yet imposing, seemed like silent mouths frozen in a frozen roar, capturing the memory of countless voices that once filled the amphitheater. The shadows deepened, mingling with the dust and the lingering traces of past spectacles, creating a tapestry of light and darkness that shifted with every passing moment. Inside the arena, the floor took on a muted golden glow from the last rays of the sun. The sand, pressed and worn over centuries, absorbed the warmth and reflected it back in soft, subtle tones. One could almost imagine the faint echoes of swords striking shields, the hurried footsteps of gladiators, or the anxious roar of an emperor assessing the crowd. Yet here, now, there was only silence, punctuated occasionally by the distant flutter of birds returning to roost, or the soft murmur of wind through the arches. The hypogeum remained a shadowy underworld, its chambers and tunnels like the bones of the Colosseum itself. In this dimming light, the hidden spaces revealed their architectural ingenuity. Trapdoors, lifts, and cages carefully designed to orchestrate drama unseen. The mechanisms, once hidden beneath the roar of thousands, now lay bare, a testament to human ingenuity, patience, and ambition. Without spectators, the machinery seemed almost contemplative, as if it too remembered the days of glory and now waited patiently for the stories to be remembered again. Above, the upper tiers, empty and still, caught the last traces of sunset. From here, the city of Rome stretched beyond view, bathed in an amber glow, quieting in preparation for night. The Colosseum, though empty, exuded a presence that dominated the skyline, not through noise or spectacle, but through the enduring weight of history. Every stone, every arch, every worn stair held the memory of human triumph and folly, a silent chronicle that had survived emperors, invasions, and centuries of change. As night fell completely, the amphitheater embraced the darkness, becoming a vessel for memory itself. Stars appeared overhead, mirrored faintly in the shadows that pooled across the arena floor. The Colosseum, no longer a stage for entertainment, had become a quiet witness to time, its grandeur intact, yet calm, waiting for anyone patient enough to enter and listen to its stories whispered in stone. As night deepened, the Colosseum's arches and corridors became cloaked in a gentle, silvery light from the moon. The stone, cooled by hours of darkness, held an almost tactile quietness, as if the entire amphitheater exhaled slowly, letting centuries of noise finally fade. The air smelled faintly of dust and old stone, carrying a whisper of the distant Tiber River and the city beyond.
Even the wind seemed subdued here, moving like a careful visitor, brushing across steps and corridors with barely a sound. Within the arena, the sand took on a soft, muted texture, absorbing the night around it. The floor, once churned by combat and performance, now lay undisturbed, a calm expanse stretching between the subterranean hypogeum and the upper tiers of empty seats. The hypogeum itself seemed almost sentient in the moonlight, its network of tunnels and cages casting long shadows, hinting at the ingenuity and tension of centuries past. One could imagine the quiet movements of gladiators preparing for entrances, the low murmurs of handlers, and the scurrying of animals, all long gone, yet eternally etched into the memory of these walls. From the upper tiers, the city of Rome was transformed at night. The city glimmered faintly in the distance, the lights of distant villas and temples twinkling like stars below the stars themselves. From this vantage point, it was easy to imagine the contrast between the stillness of the Colosseum and the life of the city beyond. The amphitheater stood as a monument not just to spectacle, but to endurance, a massive structure that absorbed and remembered the movements of generations, impervious to the fleeting hurry of human life. Even in complete darkness, the Colosseum seemed to breathe with history. The stone absorbed the sounds of night, rustling leaves, distant footsteps, the soft flutter of wings, and returned them in echoing whispers that hinted at long-past triumphs, tragedies, and quiet moments alike. Each corner, each archway, each stairwell held a story, waiting for those patient enough to notice. Here, the Colosseum existed not as a building, but as a living chronicle, quietly reminding the world that while crowds come and go, stone endures. As midnight settled fully over Rome, the Colosseum became a silent cathedral of stone. Moonlight poured through the arches, striking the arena floor in pale, shifting patterns. The sand glowed faintly, revealing subtle textures left by centuries of footsteps, gladiators, emperors, merchants, and spectators alike, an intricate map of human presence now frozen in time. The amphitheater, emptied of its living audience, seemed almost sacred, a monument to both memory and absence. In the shadows of the hypogeum, the quiet was profound. The labyrinthine tunnels beneath the arena, once alive with anticipation and fear, now lay dormant. Rusted chains, pulleys, and trapdoors recalled the ingenuity that orchestrated both spectacle and surprise, a complex system designed to astonish thousands, yet now serving only the stillness. Occasionally, the soft scuttling of nocturnal creatures broke the silence, tiny reminders that life continued even in forgotten corners. Yet their presence felt respectful, unobtrusive, as if they understood they were guests in a hall of history. The upper tiers, vast and empty, framed the city beyond. Rome slept beneath a blanket of darkness, the distant streets quiet, except for the occasional murmur of night travelers. The Colosseum appeared timeless. The interplay of shadow and moonlight highlighted architectural details, the curvature of arches, the strength of pillars, the scars of age, all telling stories of human ambition and perseverance. Every stone, every arch, every worn stair held the memory of human triumph and folly, an unspoken chronicle that had survived emperors, invasions, and centuries of change. Even the air seemed imbued with history. The cool night carried faint traces of incense, dust, and earth, smells that had lingered in the amphitheater for generations. The Colosseum, stripped of noise and spectacle, became a vessel for reflection. You could walk its corridors, pause in its shadowed corners, and feel the weight of time in a way impossible when the crowds were present. In this quiet, the amphitheater was not merely a structure, it was a storyteller, narrating the grandeur, the fear, and the fleeting nature of human life with patience and subtlety. And so, in the deep of night, the Colosseum rested, timeless and enduring. It bore witness to centuries gone by, each echo, each shadow, each stone holding its place in a story that continued long after the applause had ended, long after the crowds had gone home.
As the night deepened further, a hush settled over the Colosseum that seemed almost reverent. The arches and corridors, empty of human presence, took on a ghostly elegance under the pale glow of the moon. Each shadow seemed to have a life of its own, drifting across stone like memories in motion. The vast arena, once a stage for triumphs and tragedies alike, now lay in a calm stillness that made every detail stand out. The curves of the marble, the worn steps, the faint inscriptions left by centuries of spectators who had long since vanished. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum remained a labyrinth of silence. Trapdoors and lifts, once part of a complex theater of anticipation, now sat motionless, their rusted chains still and heavy. In the empty cages and corridors, one could imagine the past whispers of gladiators and handlers, their hurried movements, their tense anticipation, all echoing faintly against cold stone. Yet, in the absence of sound, these echoes became soft threads in the vast tapestry of the Colosseum's memory. It was as if the amphitheater itself had absorbed the lives that passed through it, keeping them alive in the quiet architecture. The upper tiers rose above, framing the city of Rome in the distance. The lights of homes and distant temples glimmered like scattered stars, but the Colosseum stood apart, monumental and unchanged. From here, it was easy to imagine the centuries of spectators who had once leaned on these stone balustrades, looking down into the arena with excitement, fear, or awe. Their presence, now only a memory pressed into the stone, lingered faintly in the cold night air, a silent testimony to the impermanence of human life compared to the endurance of stone. The air was cool and still, carrying faint traces of dust, earth, and the lingering scent of history. Every step echoed softly, reminding any visitor of the immense scale of the amphitheater. The Colosseum, devoid of its crowds, became not just a monument, but a vessel of reflection. It preserved the grandeur, the tension, the fleeting human drama, while offering a serene space for contemplation. In this quiet, one could sense the pulse of Rome itself, enduring, unhurried, and eternal. As the first hints of dawn approached, the Colosseum remained steadfast. Shadows shifted slowly with the changing light, revealing new angles, new details, and a sense of continuity that no applause or spectacle could ever create. The amphitheater, now empty, stood as a timeless witness, its stories whispered in stone, its presence a reminder that history endures long after the crowd has gone home.
As dawn broke fully over Rome, the Colosseum welcomed the first soft light of day. The marble and stone, cool from the night, began to reflect warm golden tones as the sun crept over the horizon. Shadows slowly retreated from the arches and corridors, revealing the intricate details of architecture that often went unnoticed in the chaos of a bustling day. The arena floor glowed faintly, its surface smoothed by centuries of sand and dust, a quiet witness to countless dramas that had played out here. The hypogeum, lying beneath the arena, remained shadowed, a subterranean maze of history. The rusted mechanisms, once concealed by the roar of the crowd, now lay bare in the gentle morning light. Each trapdoor, pulley, and cage told a story of human ingenuity, careful planning, and fleeting spectacle. Though empty, these spaces carried an almost sacred silence, a reminder that the pulse of life had once surged through these tunnels, now replaced by the slow rhythm of time itself. From the upper tiers, the view of the city offered a peaceful panorama. Rome stretched outward in muted colors, terracotta rooftops, winding streets, and distant hills softened by the morning haze. The Colosseum, monumental and unchanged, dominated the scene, a reminder of endurance amidst the fleeting movements of daily life. One could almost feel the presence of past spectators leaning forward in anticipation, cheering, whispering, and watching the unfolding dramas below. Their voices, though long gone, seemed etched into the very stones of the amphitheater. Birds began to stir within the arches, adding gentle life to the quiet of the morning. The air, carrying the faint scent of earth and dust, felt cool and crisp, a soft contrast to the heat that would soon fill the arena under the midday sun. The Colosseum, emptied of its human audience, became a place for reflection, a space to observe history itself, preserved in stone, enduring through centuries of change. In this stillness, the amphitheater's grandeur was not in spectacle, but in permanence, a monumental chronicle of ambition, ingenuity, and memory. As the sun climbed higher once more, the shadows shifted, revealing details hidden in the dim light of night. Every arch, every worn stair, every crack in the marble became a testament to the passage of time. The Colosseum, though silent, seemed alive in its own way, breathing with the accumulated weight of centuries. Here, history did not scream, it whispered, inviting those who listened to understand the quiet power of endurance and the fleeting nature of human life. As the morning progressed, the Colosseum settled into a rhythm dictated not by human presence, but by time itself. Sunlight streamed through the arches at ever-shifting angles, casting long lines across the worn steps and arena floor. Dust particles floated lazily in the beams, creating a delicate shimmer that seemed almost alive. The amphitheater, emptied of its crowd, revealed details unnoticed during the frenzy of games. Subtle carvings, weathered inscriptions, and the precise geometry of Roman engineering. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum remained a shadowed world of shadows and stone. Its corridors and cages, once bustling with preparation and tension, now seemed like a frozen labyrinth. Trapdoors, lifts, and rusted chains bore silent witness to centuries of performances that would never be repeated. It was possible to imagine the anxious footsteps of gladiators, the tense whispers of handlers, the growls of animals waiting for their moment, all absorbed into the stone itself. Time here felt different, slower, more contemplative, as if the amphitheater had taken on the responsibility of remembering every echo of human ambition and fear. From the upper tiers, the view of Rome stretched across the waking city. Terracotta rooftops glowed softly in the morning light, and winding streets began to stir with the quiet motions of everyday life. Yet the Colosseum remained apart, monumental and still, a timeless sentinel observing generations without judgment. Its arches framed distant hills, the rising sun painting the sky in warm hues that contrasted gently with the cool marble beneath one's feet. Every element of the structure, the curves of the columns, the texture of the stone, the scars left by centuries, spoke of endurance, of human effort captured and preserved. Birds now moved freely within the arches, their calls echoing faintly against stone. The air absorbed these sounds, letting them drift through corridors and tiers as if welcoming the small signs of life without disturbance. The air carried the faint scent of earth, stone, and history itself, creating a sensory layer that was uniquely the amphitheater's own. Walking here, one felt the presence of all who had come before, not as ghosts or spirits, but as impressions imprinted in the architecture. By late morning, the Colosseum's shadows shifted once more, stretching and shrinking with the sun. Each angle of light revealed new textures, new details, and new reminders that this was not just a relic, but a living archive. Its endurance was quiet, but powerful, a statement of permanence amidst the fleeting nature of human life. Here, even without spectators, the Colosseum remained alive in its own right, a repository of memory, ambition, and history, patiently waiting for anyone willing to observe and listen. As the sun climbed towards its zenith, the Colosseum seemed to settle into a gentle, timeless stillness. The arena floor, once churned with the energy of thousands, now lay quiet, the sand soft under the pale light. Each grain seemed to hold a memory of past events, footsteps of gladiators, the fall of animals, the movements of emperors and spectators alike. The amphitheater's stone walls absorbed the heat of the day, carrying it slowly into the shaded corridors and arches, a subtle reminder of the cycle of time and the endurance of human craftsmanship. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum remained a hidden world of shadows and stone. The corridors, cages, and mechanisms, once orchestrating spectacle and surprise, now lay dormant, their presence felt only in the faint echoes of past labor. Trapdoors, lifts, and rusted chains rusted slowly, their forms softened by dust and time, yet still testaments to the ingenuity that had once allowed Rome to entertain and control its audience. In the quiet, the hypogeum seemed almost sacred, a place where the memory of countless lives and stories lingered invisibly. From the upper tiers, the city of Rome stretched outward, bathed in bright morning light. Roofs glimmered, streets began to hum with movement, and distant hills softened in the heat of the day. Yet the Colosseum remained apart, monumental and still, a timeless sentinel observing generations without judgment. Its arches framed the world beyond, while within, the marble stairs and worn seats stood as reminders of centuries of human ambition and folly. Here, one could trace the passage of time not only in the city, but in the very stones of the amphitheater. Birds and small creatures moved through the arches and corridors, adding life to the quiet, but always in harmony with the stillness of the structure. The air smelled faintly of dust, stone, and earth warmed by the sun, carrying with it the intangible weight of history. Walking here, one felt the presence of countless unnamed spectators, gladiators, and workers, all absorbed into the fabric of the building. The Colosseum, even without its crowd, maintained a powerful presence, telling stories through space, light, and shadow, rather than sound or spectacle. As midday approached, the Colosseum's grandeur became ever more apparent. Light and shadow shifted across arches and corridors, revealing the subtle details of Roman engineering. Every worn stair, every crack in the marble, every carved inscription spoke of a civilization that valued both strength and artistry. The amphitheater's silence allowed these details to emerge fully, unobserved yet undeniable, inviting reflection on the transience of human life and the endurance of history. Here, the Colosseum was not merely a building, it was a storyteller, patiently recounting centuries of triumph, tragedy, and quiet persistence.
As the afternoon sun shifted across the sky, the Colosseum revealed yet another layer of its quiet majesty. The light filtered through the arches in golden streams, illuminating the arena floor and upper tiers with a soft warmth. The sand, pressed smooth by centuries of footsteps, shimmered faintly, catching the sun in subtle patterns that changed with the movement of the day. Each shadow told its own story, tracing the contours of marble stairs, pillars, and walls with delicate precision. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum remained a secret world of stillness. The tunnels and chambers, once throbbing with activity and anticipation, now lay dormant, their mechanisms frozen in time. Rusted pulleys, trapdoors, and cages spoke quietly of the ingenuity that had orchestrated centuries of spectacle. The air in these lower passages was cool and dense, carrying faint echoes of the past, the nervous footsteps of gladiators, the low growls of caged beasts, the careful movements of handlers. These sounds, long silent, seemed preserved within the stone itself, a subtle hum that one could almost sense if one paused long enough. From the upper tiers, the city of Rome stretched outward, bustling now with ordinary life. Merchants called to one another, carts rumbled across stone streets, and distant voices mingled with the warm afternoon air. Yet the Colosseum stood apart,
monumental and indifferent to the movement of people. Its arches framed the city in quiet dignity, reminding all who approached that while life outside was fleeting, the amphitheater endured. Each worn stair and weathered marble slab carried a story, a memory of human ambition and endurance that outlasted generations. Birds circled through the arches, their wings stirring the warm air, and occasional breezes whispered along the corridors. The amphitheater absorbed these movements gently, as if acknowledging the passage of time without disturbance. The Colosseum's vastness allowed one to feel both solitude and connection, alone within its halls, yet part of an unbroken chain of observers, performers, and builders who had passed through these spaces for centuries. As the day edged toward evening, the Colosseum seemed to shift once more. Light softened, shadows lengthened, and the stones cooled slightly under the fading sun. The amphitheater's presence became even more contemplative, a place to sense history not as a spectacle, but as a living archive. Every arch, every seat, every worn stair silently recorded the passage of centuries, bearing witness to the fleeting nature of human life and the enduring majesty of the Roman Empire. In this quiet, the Colosseum spoke clearly, inviting reflection on both the impermanence of crowds and the permanence of stone. As evening approached, the Colosseum transformed yet again under the gentle descent of the sun. The warm afternoon light softened into a muted amber, stretching shadows across the worn arena floor and curling along the arches. The marble, smoothed by centuries of footsteps, glowed faintly, and each detail of the architecture became more pronounced in the slanting light. The amphitheater, devoid of its usual throngs, seemed almost introspective, a colossal monument quietly reflecting on its own history. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum remained a shadowed, secret world. The tunnels and chambers, once live with anticipation and tension, now lay dormant, their mechanisms silent. Rusted chains, trapdoors, and lifts stood as silent witnesses to centuries of spectacle, their ingenuity preserved even as their purpose faded from daily memory. In the cool shadows, one could almost sense the echoes of the past, the nervous footsteps of gladiators, the low growls of caged animals, the careful movements of handlers. These sounds, long silent, seemed preserved within the stone itself, a subtle hum that one could almost sense if one paused long enough. From the upper tiers, the city of Rome stretched outward, bustling now with quiet life. Terracotta rooftops reflected the sun's last rays, and streets began to empty as people returned to their homes. Yet the Colosseum remained steadfast, monumental, and eternal. Its arches framed the horizon, its worn steps spoke of centuries of human presence, and its massive walls carried the weight of history with quiet dignity. One could imagine the countless spectators who had leaned forward in anticipation, the senators and citizens whose voices once filled this space, all leaving an imprint now preserved in stone. Birds returned to roost among the arches, their wings stirring the cooling air. A gentle breeze whispered through the corridors, carrying dust, the faint scent of earth, and the intangible essence of centuries past. The amphitheater absorbed these subtle movements, as if acknowledging the passage of life outside without being disturbed. In this space, the passage of time felt almost tangible, the slow march of hours reflected in the shifting shadows, the cooling stone, and the steady silence of empty seats. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the Colosseum embraced twilight. The arena, the hypogeum, and the upper tiers all seemed to exhale together, settling into the calm of evening. The structure, no longer a stage for spectacle, became a vessel for memory.
Each stone, each arch, each worn stair held its story in quiet testimony, offering a reflection on endurance, ambition, and the ephemeral nature of human life. In this serene darkness, the Colosseum stood timeless, patiently observing a city that moved on, while it remembered all that had come before. In the early hours before dawn, the Colosseum existed in a world between night and day, suspended in a hushed, almost sacred pause. The moon had dipped lower, leaving only the faintest silver traces on the arena floor, and the first hints of approaching sunlight tinged the horizon with soft pinks and golds. The amphitheater, empty and monumental, seemed to exhale gently, settling into the rhythm of a day yet to begin. The hypogeum below remained a shadowed labyrinth, its tunnels and chambers silent and still. The cages, trapdoors, and lifts, all once integral to the drama above, stood motionless, holding the memory of countless spectacles. In this quiet, the ingenuity and tension of the ancient organizers could almost be felt, lingering in the stones and ironwork, a ghostly trace of human purpose. The space no longer demanded action, it simply existed, preserving the essence of what was with a calm dignity. From the upper tiers, the city of Rome slowly awakened. The faint murmur of distant streets and the occasional clatter of carts began to stir, but the Colosseum remained apart, observing quietly. Its arches framed the city like windows through time, and its worn steps and stone seats stood as enduring witnesses to the lives of those who had once gathered to watch and marvel. Each detail, from carved inscriptions to the curvature of pillars, spoke of both human ambition and the inexorable passage of time. Birds and nocturnal creatures moved cautiously through the arches and corridors, their subtle sounds adding life to the calm of the structure. The air carried the faint scent of dust, stone, and the earth itself, enriched by centuries of history. Walking through the amphitheater at this hour felt like stepping into another era, one where time moved differently, slower, and where the presence of humans was only a fleeting echo against the permanence of stone. As the horizon brightened, casting the first rays of sunlight into the arena, the Colosseum embraced the new day with quiet grandeur. The shadows shifted, revealing fresh details in the stonework and highlighting the immense scale of the structure. Each arch, each step, each worn surface spoke to the endurance of Rome itself. In this gentle morning light, the amphitheater was not merely a relic, but a witness to history, patient, silent, and eternal, reminding all who entered that even after the crowd has gone home, stories remain in stone.
As the morning fully awakened, the Colosseum seemed to breathe with a steady, timeless rhythm. Sunlight now poured through the arches, illuminating the arena floor and casting long, intricate patterns across the marble and stone. Dust floated in golden streams, drifting lazily in the warm air, each particle catching the light as though carrying a memory of centuries past. The amphitheater, empty of its human audience, displayed a quiet majesty that could only be appreciated in stillness. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum lay in cool shadow, a hidden labyrinth untouched by the sun. Its cages, pulleys, and trapdoors, once orchestrating tension and surprise, now rested silently. The faint scent of earth and stone filled the air, mingling with the soft echoes of history preserved within its walls. It was easy to imagine the footsteps, whispers, and hurried movements of gladiators and handlers, all absorbed into the very fabric of the hypogeum, waiting patiently for anyone who cared to notice. From the upper tiers, Rome stretched into the distance, a city slowly stirring to life. Roofs glimmered, streets began to hum faintly, and the distant hills softened in the morning light. Yet the Colosseum stood apart, monumental and enduring, a silent observer of the centuries that had passed and the lives that continued to flow beyond its walls. Every step, every arch, every worn marble slab carried the imprint of ambition, spectacle, and endurance. Birds and small creatures moved carefully through the arches and corridors, adding subtle life to the vast stillness. The air was filled with the scent of sun-warmed stone and dust, a tangible reminder of the passage of time. Walking through the amphitheater at this hour felt like stepping into another era, one where the presence of humans was ephemeral, but the history of human endeavor remained permanent. As the day matured, the Colosseum revealed the elegance of its architecture in quiet detail. Sunlight highlighted the curvature of pillars, the precision of arches, and the beauty of weathered inscriptions. The arena floor, smooth from centuries of use, reflected the enduring patience of stone. Here, the amphitheater did not need a crowd to speak. It communicated through space, light, shadow, and texture, preserving the memory of Rome long after the applause had faded and the spectators had gone home. As midday approached, the Colosseum settled into a serene stillness that only centuries of endurance could produce. Sunlight streamed through the arches at sharp angles, illuminating the arena floor and upper tiers in warm, shifting patterns. The sand, smooth and settled, absorbed the heat, while shadows traced the contours of marble stairs, columns, and walls with deliberate precision. In this quiet, the amphitheater revealed details often missed during the bustling hours of human occupation. Carved inscriptions, subtle cracks, and the architectural mastery of Roman design. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum remained a shadowed world of history. Its tunnels and cages, once the site of tension and anticipation, lay motionless. Trapdoors, rusted chains, and pulleys stood as mute witnesses to centuries of orchestrated spectacle. The air, cool and dense, carried an invisible trace of the past. The footsteps of gladiators, the murmurs of attendants, the low growls of animals, all imprinted in the stone, as if time itself had chosen to preserve these fleeting moments. From the upper tiers, the view of Rome stretched into a sunlit panorama. Streets hummed faintly with merchants and travelers, rooftops glimmered in the bright light, and distant hills rose softly against the sky. Yet the Colosseum remained apart, monumental and eternal. Its arches framed the world beyond, and its worn steps and marble surfaces whispered of human ambition, endurance, and the impermanence of crowds. Every detail, every curvature of a pillar, to the weathered texture of stone, spoke to centuries of life absorbed into architecture. Birds moved through the arches with graceful freedom, adding a subtle rhythm to the quiet. The amphitheater seemed to absorb these motions, welcoming them without disturbance, a subtle acknowledgement of the passage of life outside its walls. Walking through its corridors and tiers, one could feel the pulse of history, not in noise or spectacle, but in the persistent presence of stone and shadow, light and memory. As the sun climbed higher, the Colosseum's grandeur became fully apparent. Every arch, every stair and surface bore witness to time, endurance, and ingenuity. The amphitheater, empty of spectators, remained a storyteller in its own right, communicating the triumphs, struggles, and fleeting human dramas preserved in its architecture. Here, history was not loud, it was patient, enduring, and ever-present, reminding all who entered that while crowds may come and go, the memory of human endeavor remains etched in stone. As afternoon gave way to evening, the Colosseum seems to exhale, settling into a profound and enduring calm. The sun dipped low, casting warm, golden light across the arena floor, the upper tiers, and the arches. Shadows stretched long and deep, curling around the marble steps and pillars, highlighting centuries of wear and history etched into the stone. The amphitheater, now completely empty, stood as a monument not just to spectacle, but to time itself, a quiet observer of human ambition and impermanence. Beneath the arena, the hypogeum remained a labyrinth of memory. The cages, pulleys, and trapdoors, long silent, carried the echoes of preparation and anticipation. One could almost sense the nervous energy of gladiators, the growls of caged animals, and the careful orchestration of spectacle that once surged through these corridors. The mechanisms, rusted and still, held a dignity of their own, a quiet testament to Roman ingenuity preserved beneath the arena's surface. From the upper tiers, Rome stretched outward into the soft glow of evening. The city's streets were quieting, rooftops and distant hills bathed in fading light.
Yet the Colosseum remained steadfast, monumental, and eternal. Its arches framed the horizon, and its marble surfaces whispered the stories of countless spectators, emperors, gladiators, and workers whose presence had once animated this vast structure. Every scar, every worn stair, every carved inscription carried the memory of human ambition and endurance. Birds returned to roost, their wings stirring gently through the arches, and the faint breeze moved through corridors and corridors with quiet grace. The amphitheater absorbed these movements, embracing the rhythm of the world outside without disturbance. Here, one could feel the weight of history, the persistent presence of human life now gone, and yet forever preserved in stone and shadow. As night fully descended, the Colosseum stood in serene grandeur, a timeless witness to centuries of spectacle, ambition, and human endeavor. Though the crowds had gone home long ago, the stories remained alive, etched into the arches, the steps, the walls, and the arena floor. History in this space did not fade. It endured, patient, quiet, and eternal. The Colosseum had become more than a building. It had become a keeper of memory, a storyteller in stone, and a monument to the enduring pulse of Rome long after the applause had faded and the crowds had gone home. The pulse of Rome slows. The keeper of memories falls silent. The night is complete. Sleep now. The Colosseum is dreaming, and so are you. Good night.